Welcome to another Innovative Health Solutions webinar. My name is Dr. Wallner, and this is the Renaissance of Healthcare. Today we're talking all about leaky brain. You know, there's so much information that I have here in this presentation. I had to split this webinar into two parts. So during this first part, I'm going to cover the most common issues I see clinically here in the office. And in part two, I'll cover all of the practical applications and what you can do if you have leaky brain. So if you've been to any of my webinars before, you'll know that we always start out with the mission statement here at Innovative Health Solutions, which is to foster the highest standard in primary natural health care. Our values include improving and restoring the quality of life of every patient by fostering physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual health, as well as emphasizing the importance of chiropractic adjustments, nutritional support, and natural therapies. Again, my name is Dr. Wallner. I am a applied kinesiologist, licensed chiropractor, and functional medicine practitioner. So, find us on social media. We're always posting the latest and greatest in health and wellness news. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So to get us warmed up, here's a quick brain warm-up for us. Brain myelination does not fully complete until 25 years old, just like skeletal maturity. In 2014, 8 to 10% of Americans are expected to have a thyroid problem. 90% of those are autoimmune thyroid. So that's an immune disease issue. Okay? There is no technical autoimmunologist. You can see the immunologist, but for autoimmune disease, there is no autoimmunologist specialty. In terms of MRI, we have a couple different things here. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, when seen on an MRI, looks the same as a concussion, which is often a similar emotional event. Okay, so we're now looking at concussions looking the same as PTSD, which is why we so highly advocate to see a therapist or a counselor. Okay, on MRI, we also see gluten sensitivity and sugar consumption looking the same parts of the brain light up. And there are tons of therapies for our organs, our liver, our gallbladder, and our stomach, but there are not many therapies for our brains. So let's quickly talk over our goals for today. And like I said, we are going to do two parts. So in this first part, we're going to talk about what we see clinically, kind of the whole healthy brain, how does the healthy brain work, and what is leaky brain, what causes leaky brain. And then in part two, we're going to get into how chiropractors can help and what we can do about it. So, a healthy brain works in the following ways. Neurons have three basic needs: oxygen, glucose, and stimulation. Okay, so if your brain isn't getting good oxygen, and if it's not having a steady supply of blood sugar, and if it's not being stimulated, it's going to atrophy just like a muscle would. Okay, it's going to neurodegenerate. Okay, excuse me. The central nervous system is composed of your brain and spinal cord. Okay, a healthy person is able to, with a healthy brain, is able to eat, digest, eliminate, exercise, think cognitively or critically, or read, and they're able to sleep. So, if you're wondering if you're having any kind of brain neurodegeneration, assess the function of your body in terms of, are you able to eat and digest and eliminate the food that you consume, and are you able to exercise and think cognitively? Because those are the hallmarks of proper and healthy brain function. Your brain in neurology is not considered a sense like smell or taste. It is considered an emotion like we were talking about earlier. Your perception of pain is not always real. If you pinch 25 people exactly the same way, everyone will have a different view on how much the pinch hurt. In a depressed person, the cingulate, or part of the limbic system, fires to another part of the brain that controls pain perception. So some depressed people have neuropathic pain. This is one mechanism for allodynia, or pain from a non-painful stimulus. So if someone gives you a hug or holds your hand and that's really sensitive for you, you may be having symptoms of a leaky brain or some kind of neurodegenerative symptom that can lead to this altered pain perception model that we're talking about. So just a little bit about the lymphatic system here, which we're going to talk about more, but cranial adjustments or actual adjusting of the cranial bones, which we do here in the office, can significantly improve not only the drainage but the flow of these vessels here in the brain. Real quick, excuse me, this is your cortex up here, and this is your cerebellum. So if you hear me talk about the cortex, I'm talking about all of this on top. And if you hear me talk about the cerebellum, I'm talking about all of this down here. Right below the cerebellum, we have what's called the brainstem. All right, so adjustments to the cervical spine, specifically the upper part of your neck, are going to really modulate and influence the brainstem here. So let's get right into it. What is leaky brain? So in the same way that you can have leaky gut, which I encourage you to check out my webinar on leaky gut, you can also have a leaky brain. It's the same concept. We have one cell thick lining of a gut blood barrier, if you will. Okay, the intestinal barrier is one cell thick. So food can go through the cells or it can go in between the cells and get into our bloodstream. And that's not just food, that's toxins, that's chemicals, that's pesticides, herbicides on the food, anything. And then your immune system starts attacking that because it's in your bloodstream. Okay? So in the same way, we have a semi-permeable layer of cells in the brain called the blood-brain barrier. And those are only allowed to let certain things in and keep other things out, like we talked about. Okay, the blood-brain barrier is our specialized blood vessels for our brain. They only allow in healthy and helpful things, and they keep the harmful molecules and substances out. Okay, this is similar to our intestinal barrier. Okay. So when we have leaky brain, that protective barrier has been breached, and now harmful substances are getting into our brain. Okay? A leaky brain is when that protective blood-brain barrier has become breached and substances that are normally kept out of the brain are able to cross over through the walls of the vessels into the brain. So, how do we test for leaky brain? There are two main ways that we do it. The one is called GABA challenge, which we're going to talk about GABA more a little bit later. But we know that GABA should not cross the blood-brain barrier. It's too large. So if we give you GABA and you have any kind of symptoms, whether it be an overexcitability or a depressed or an anxiety type reaction, then we know that you have a leaky brain because you're having a reaction because this neurotransmitter is getting into your brain from the gut, if you will. The other way we test for it is with Cyrex Laboratories. They actually do immunoglobulin testing for blood-brain barrier protein. Okay, so there's that, and that's a blood test, so we can also order that as well. If you're familiar with Pinky and the Brain, just some comic relief for us here. As you know, every night they try and take over the world. Look through this quick list here and see if any of these are a part of your daily experience. High stress level, never have time for yourself. Feelings of inner rage, paranoia, feeling that the bowels don't completely empty. So we talk a lot about the frontal cortex and how the sensation of having to go to the bathroom is signaled from the gut to the brain, and if the brain isn't getting that signal, or if the brain is not able to fire the signal to evacuate the bowel contents, that is a brain-based mechanism. So if that's part of your experience, that is a brain-based function which we can help you work on. All right, there's a whole slew of things here. I won't go and read all of them, but what we can do is we can give the patient questionnaires like this, and we can clinically correlate and associate, okay, you've got a lot of things that go with the frontal cortex, or you got a lot of things that go with the neurotransmitters serotonin or dopamine, which we're going to talk more about later. And then we can figure out what we need to work on in order to get some clinical results and improvement. So a little bit about gluten here real quick. Gluten is not necessarily bad for you, it's the bad gluten that's bad for you. So we have people that come back from Australia, we have people that come back from Europe, and they have their baguettes, and they have their croissants, and they have their muffins and bagels, and they're fine. When they come back here to the States is when they have the problem, okay? It's the genetic modification, it's the pesticides, it's the herbicides, it's the altering of our food and our grains that is really messing with our health. One of the ways that's happening is by a mechanism called molecular mimicry. Okay, so many people are gluten sensitive even though they may not have symptoms. I'm not saying you have to be celiac disease or diagnosed with celiac disease in order to avoid gluten, but the gluten protein chemically resembles not only the thyroid but also the cerebellum, okay, which is part of the brain. So, to illustrate that point, let me draw your attention to this frame here. Here's the gluten protein, one of the gluten proteins, gliadin, okay, and here's its amino acid profile, okay. Here's the amino acid profile of the cerebellum, okay. So what they've done is they've mapped the amino acid profile for both of these tissues and the gluten protein, okay. And what they found is that there are 4 similar markers here, okay. So, when you have gluten, and if you have leaky gut, and that gluten gets into your bloodstream, your immune system sees the gluten, and it goes, oh man, there's gluten, and it starts attacking the gluten. Now, because your immune system is robust and well-functioning, it also, if it comes into contact with cerebellar tissue, which it inevitably does, it also attacks the cerebellar tissue because it looks so similar to gluten or gliadin. Okay, so that's why you might feel dizzy or have cerebellar ataxia or gluten ataxia after you have a bagel or a piece of bread. It's because your immune system is now not only attacking the gluten, it's also attacking your brain or your cerebellum. So that principle is called molecular mimicry, very popular right now in the functional medicine literature. If you've been around Dr. Brockenshire and I for any amount of time, you'll know that we're always talking about methylation, so let's hit on that a little bit. Methylation is the ability of the body to move methyl groups from molecule to molecule, if you will. So you have this carbon and this molecule of 3 hydrogens that is involved with almost every reaction in the body, okay? Specifically, MTHFR is an enzyme that our body makes which helps convert folate into the active form, okay? Our genetics can upregulate or downregulate the efficiency of this enzyme. Methylation is an important consideration in chronic fatigue, pregnancy, your folic acid, your vitamin B9, the neural tube defects, depression, conversion of RNA to DNA. So get this, to actually make DNA from RNA, your body needs to be able to methylate. Okay, not over-methylate, not under-methylate, but the proper level of methylation. Toxicity or ammonia buildup is a very important consideration. With regards to methylation, glutathione function, we're going to talk about homocysteine in a second here. Any neurologic symptom due to a neurotransmitter connection can be a function of a problem in the methylation pathways, okay? So just want to draw your attention here. Tryptophan, serotonin, tyrosine, dopamine, okay? These are part of the methylation pathways, okay? So we can do genetic testing for the 129.8C, the 677T, and the COMT genes, or that test for the catecholamines, all right? Here's the point I want to drive home today. Methylation is involved in the synthesizing of neurotransmitters, and that's why it relates to our discussion on leaky brain for today. Some key herbs for methylation are ginkgo, garlic, rhodiola, and kava. I always hear Dr. B talking about these fantastic herbs to help our methylation pathways. The glymphatic system. Okay, so this is really important to talk about today. In our body, in our peripheral systems, we have lymph vessels. We have lymph nodes. This is part of our immune system. In our brain, we don't necessarily have lymph vessels and lymph nodes. What we have is called the glymphatic system. Okay? When we sleep, and ideally we're getting really good deep sleep, but I know not everyone's doing that, there is an exchange between cerebral spinal fluid and interstitial fluid. Okay? And that's driven by the arterial pulsation and regulated during sleep by the expansion and contraction of the brain extracellular space. So what does all that mean? So again, when we sleep, the circulation in our arteries increases, okay, and it becomes permeable, all right? There is a flow of connective tissue and fluid through the space in our brain, which is then picked up in our veins. So that's the reason for why when you wake up in the morning, you feel like you can think clearly because your brain has been flushed out of toxins, okay? A study back in 2013 suggests that sleep clears the brain of damaging molecules associated with neurodegeneration. Using mice, researchers showed for the first time that the space between brain cells may increase during sleep, allowing the brain to flush out toxins that build up during waking hours. Glia are the cells that control the flow through the glymphatic system by shrinking or swelling. So if you're not getting that good night's sleep, that process isn't happening. There is no substitute for good sleep. Okay, so we really try to help our patients with getting a good night's rest here in the office. I always tell my patients, I want your room completely dark. I don't want any lights or phones. Our pineal gland is very sensitive to light via our optic nerve, which is in our eye. Clinically, we're getting really good results with phosphatidylserine as a transdermal cream that helps reset healthy cortisol levels by acting on a part of the brain called the hippocampus. Okay, so we're finding that yes, you can have adrenal fatigue. Yes, you can have dysglycemia and blood sugar issues. However, we're finding that the remedies or the ways in which we used to fix those problems are no longer the primary. We have to go higher up into the brain and actually fix the brain. So let's talk about neurotransmitters for a bit. There are 4 neurotransmitters I want to touch on today. They are acetylcholine, serotonin, GABA, and dopamine. So let's talk about acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is synthesized or made from choline, which is a dietary fat that can cross the blood-brain barrier. Okay, acetylcholine is not only in the brain, but it's also in all synapses are sensitive to acetylcholine. It's in our body and it's in our brain. Some foods that are high in choline include liver and organ meats, egg yolks, beef. Of course, you want to get USDA organic, non-GMO, grass-fed, dolphin-friendly beef. Tofu, but I do recommend patients stay away from too much soy because soy has very estrogenic properties which can mimic estrogen. Nuts and seeds, but I do caution too much with that because there are many lectins on nuts which can be pro-inflammatory. And then of course your dairy items are high in choline as well, like your cream, your milk fat, and your fatty cheeses. Okay, let's talk about serotonin for a bit. Serotonin is synthesized from an amino acid called tryptophan. Okay, so if you're taking an SSRI, that pharmaceutical is altering your brain's feedback mechanisms and your normal serotonin synthesis mechanisms. Okay, so hear what I'm saying and hear what I'm not saying. The short-term use of a pharmaceutical, to help you get over a significant event is not something that I'm saying is wrong. What I do have an issue with is patients who have been on SSRIs, benzodiazepines, and D2 blockers for years that are now addicted, if you will, to the medications, and if they try to get off the medications, they'll start to experience withdrawal symptoms. So, continuing to talk about serotonin, SSRIs dump serotonin into the synaptic cleft, okay? The synaptic cleft is right here. So you have one neuron on one end, one neuron on the other. The synaptic cleft is right here, and this is the neurotransmitter, if you will, okay? Since the body works on feedback loops, the body responds to the medication in two ways. One, the body is going to make less serotonin on its own. And two, the body is going to shrink or downregulate the receptors for serotonin. Okay? This is the mechanism, or this is the reason why we see withdrawal symptoms for patients that are trying to get off SSRIs, benzodiazepines, and D2 blockers. Okay? Most of the serotonin that we make is actually coming from our GI tract, not our brain. Serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier, but tryptophan does. Okay? This is what helps you fall asleep and feel good about life. SSRIs are known to work about 8 to 13% of the time. So, to give you an analogy here, if you took your car to the mechanic because your brakes weren't working and you wanted to have your brakes repaired, and they said to you it's going to cost you $1,500 to repair your brakes, and there's an 8 to 13% chance that they're going to do it right and that your brakes are going to work, would you do it? I don't think so. Alright, so that kind of gives you an idea of the tragic state that we're in with our Western society and these pharmaceuticals. They're not working very well and very often. Okay? If you've heard of 5-hydroxytryptophan, okay, or 5-HTP, or if you're taking a tryptophan supplement, okay, I want to call your attention to the following situation here. If you're taking tryptophan or 5-HTP and you feel worse, okay, then that means you have a problem with an enzyme called IDO, okay? This, you're supposed to be able to have tryptophan go straight to serotonin, okay? But what can happen under states of stress or infection, okay, or any other inflammatory response is that this enzyme, indolamine 2,3-deoxygenase, okay, can shunt tryptophan to these other pathways here. One is neuroprotective and one is neurodegenerative. Okay? So, again, to really drive this point home, if you feel worse after taking a tryptophan or a 5-HTP supplement, okay, you could be making quinolinic acid, which is neurodegenerative and pro-inflammatory, or you could be making a neuroprotective kynurenic acid, okay, which is neuroprotective. So we're not worried about that, but we're worried about quinolinic acid down there on the bottom, which is neurodegenerative, okay? So I do want to call your attention to that. So work with your chiropractor, work with your doctor to make sure that that mechanism is intact. Let's talk a little bit about GABA. GABA comes from glutamate. GABA stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid. This is the only true inhibitory neurotransmitter, okay? Again, comes from glutamate, which is synthesized into GABA via the GAD or the GAD enzyme, okay? Endogenous GABA does not cross the blood-brain barrier like we talked about earlier, so that's why we can do a GABA challenge to see if you have a leaky brain. The GAD enzyme is also found in the pancreas, which can lead to autoimmune diabetes. Okay, very cutting-edge research with that. All neurons in the brain make GABA. Those neurons are sensitive to hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen, and poor circulation. When you get adjusted, when you get your spine adjusted, GABA is released from the dorsal root ganglion in the spine. This is why your migraine goes away when you get your neck adjusted and why you feel so good after spinal adjustments. Let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine comes from the amino acid tyrosine. Okay, so with all these amino acids, eat your protein, eat your fats for your choline and your acetylcholine. All right, a deficiency in dopamine can lead to Parkinson's. Okay, the substantia nigra and the loss of dopamine producing cells is the definition of Parkinson's. Okay, if you want to increase your dopamine levels, here are 3 things you can do. Eat a steak, smoke a cigar, funny enough, and eat some dark chocolate. I tend to lean towards the steak and the dark chocolate. I don't recommend my patients smoke cigars very often, but those are 3 things that have been shown in the literature to boost your dopamine levels. So let's talk a bit about homotrophic modulation. Okay, this is just a fancy word for a mechanism that is unique to acetylcholine. Homotrophic modulation describes a phenomenon analogous to insulin sensitivity, a more well-known concept. Basically, overstimulation of neurons with respect to GABA, dopamine, serotonin will eventually lead to the body downregulating or removing its receptors because it's trying to balance the neurotransmitter. The concept of neurotransmitter sensitization applies to all neurotransmitters except for acetylcholine. Daily support of acetylcholine is safe. In fact, it's the opposite happens with acetylcholine receptors. Constant stimulation of acetylcholine receptors makes them more responsive and sensitive, so they need less acetylcholine for the same effect. L-huperzine A is a potent compound derived from club moss, Huperzia serrata. It decreases the breakdown of acetylcholine and increases levels of the neurotransmitter in the brain. Huperzine has been shown to be an effective aid in memory, cognition, and Alzheimer's support. It is one of the most effective compounds and one to first use if you have any symptoms of acetylcholine imbalance or leaky brain imbalance. So here in the office, I use something like acetyl-CH active here on my traumatic brain injury patients, on my concussion patients, my closed head injury patients, any sort of brain neurodegeneration. Students who are studying for board exams and finals, don't take pharmaceutical medications to help you study. Try acetyl-CH active and see how you can concentrate and study and do well on that exam. Patients who are constipated, like we talked about earlier, that frontal cortex, okay, that cingulate gyrus, that sensation of having to empty the bowels. Acetylcholine is involved in that functioning, okay? Acetylcholine also activates vagal motor nuclei, the area of the brain that makes you feel nauseous, vomit, and also, like I just mentioned, to activate peristalsis activity. If you are constipated, you may be suffering from a frontal lobe deficiency in acetylcholine. Your brain isn't firing the signal to move your bowels. Let's talk a little bit about depression before we round up part 1 here. Depression is now so common that it is the #2 cause of disability here in the United States. So, really have that sink in. People are so depressed that they can't get up and go to work. Okay, in 1955, just to give you some perspective, 38,000 people diagnosed as depressed. Now it's close to 9 million. For acute depression, the fix is typically easy. Diet, exercise, lifestyle, there are very simple things that can combat an acute presentation of depression. Chronic depression can cause brain neurodegeneration, constipation, memory deficits. It's a major problem. As Dr. Karazian always says, it's typically depression and insomnia, or depression and fatigue, depression and brain fog, depression and anxiety. Okay, so we're really looking at that frontal cortex, that cingulate gyrus, okay, for the depression model that we look at. I do encourage you to check out Dr. Karazian, that's Kharrazian. All of his YouTube videos and his work, his books that are out are highly referenced and what many practitioners are using today as a functional medicine model and as a brain and a thyroid and a gut model here. So once again, just want to drive this point home. SSRIs, benzodiazepines, and D2 blockers, while they're not necessarily bad in the short term, the long-term dependence of them is going to rob the brain's ability to make neurotransmitters, which is called synthesis, and use them for proper brain function, which is called receptor sensitivity. So a little comic relief to drive us home here, and we've come to the end of part 1 for our Leaky Brain Talk. So again, stay in touch with us on social media. Again, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you for attending another Innovative Health Solutions webinar. My name is Dr. Wallner, and this is the Renaissance of Healthcare.